Today I'm going to be reviewing the Lego Movie 2, the second part. So the first Lego Movie came out in 2014, and I've got to say, it is one of the best animated films of the decade that I've seen. I've got to say, mate, it is so fucking good. The animation in that film was extremely creative. The humor was completely on point. Every joke landed. It was such a great film. Honestly, when I first saw it advertised, to me, it just looked like a huge, I don't know, like a huge advertisement for Lego, basically. But it never ended up being that. It ended up surpassing all expectations. And yeah, for me, it's gone down as a huge highlight for animated films this decade. Certainly pretty much better than anything Pixar has put out this decade, I would say, as well. No slander towards Pixar, absolutely adore Pixar, but honestly, this film, Lego Movie, it surpasses all those films, I think. So, of course, with the success that the first one had, massive sales it garnered, there was going to be a sequel. I didn't know when it was coming, and the fact that this just came out, I honestly don't even remember any trailers being announced. I haven't really seen anything about this film. It's almost been one of the most low-key animated releases in the longest time. I'm just amazed that I've just seen very little from critics, from fan responses. So I'm just wondering why there hasn't been as much of a push to this one. I mean, it's come out really early in the year as well. Films like this are usually destined for summertime, blockbuster releases, that kind of stuff. Yeah, very confused about this. And, well, my thoughts on this film, I don't know. I guess I'm pretty underwhelmed by it. It certainly doesn't live up to the first one. That's very hard to do anyway. Most sequels don't live up to the first one. That's pretty much a given at this point. But I don't know, there's something felt missing from this film for me. That spark, that sort of instant humor that just landed and made you laugh out loud, it's just gone. I didn't really find many moments in this film that were really that funny. I mean, the animation, I can't really slander here. It's certainly as good as the first film. Although the action sequences themselves were pretty whatever, I don't really feel as though there were any standout moments, whereas in the first film, a lot of the action was completely, in your face. It was hectic, it was crazy, for the good as well. It wasn't in a bad way, it was all really well done. I also think the film just rushed into some action sequences as well. I mean, pretty much 20 minutes into the film, there was a good handful of big fight scenes and action moments that just felt really rushed. And if they just maybe sort of developed the story a bit better earlier on, maybe these would have benefited from that, but they just weren't really as entertaining to look at. So the fact that we had so many in quick succession did kind of pull away from the quality of them, I think. As for the story itself, though, it was fine. I don't really feel all that invested in what was going on throughout the film. There were a few times where I just didn't really care for some of the scenes. They definitely threw some things over the top to probably appeal to a younger audience, which I don't think they really did that in the first one. Some of the really silly humor was definitely destined for 6 and 7 year olds, which obviously, it's an animated film. I shouldn't really moan about that kind of thing, but everything in the first one was so quirky and off the cuff. All the humor just landed so naturally, whereas in this one it was very much just Batman's really silly now. He's a super strong character who's never shows his feelings, but we're just going to give him some really silly lines. He has this really phoned-in love story with the character that played by Tiffany Haddish. I actually liked her inclusion in the story. Tiffany Haddish is just usually great anyway. But yeah, that entire thing between Batman and that character, what was the point of that? I don't know. The character that Alison Brie plays just constantly said stupid things. Charlie Day was shouting spaceship again just for that sort of nostalgia factor. He did have more of an incorporation into the story, which I appreciated. But yeah, I think his character was very short-lived. There wasn't really much they could do with him, I don't think. I mean, the whole brainwashing thing that happened did explain why they were all pretty silly. So it's not like I can complain too much about that. But I do feel like it was a bit of a plot device just to sort of throw in that lazy, silly type humor, very slapstick type stuff. It just didn't really land at all. There was an interesting thing going on between Emmett and his future self, Rex. I think it was really obvious though that it was like the alternative version of him. I mean, I don't know, Chris Pratt did a pretty good job at separating the voices, but he still sounded like Chris Pratt, so it was just like, yeah, surely this guy isn't a completely different guy, surely it's like an alternate version of himself or something like that, and it ended up being like the future version of himself. It worked, but it just didn't really fully fit, I don't think. And honestly, I don't really feel like the idea of Emmett having to change was put in very well. Like, obviously, in the first film, he was this, lovable, charming guy who also had a lot of courage, a lot of bravery. And yet, in this film, everyone's like, oh no, you need to change, you need to man up, you need to toughen up. And then the only reason that Lucy decided that she didn't want that side of him was because she saw the future version of him. I found that a little toxic, to be honest. It's like, oh yeah, I want you to change and, become more powerful with this new era that we're in, and we all have to be brave and, manly. But now that I've seen what you do become like, I don't want that. I do think that was really poorly executed, to be honest. Not really a fan of how they incorporated that in. And there was a nice message to be taken away from the film, but yeah, just some of the things just didn't really work for me. I do want to point out as well the random musical sequences that came through. Tiffany Haddish had 2 singing performances in this film, and they were fine performances. The songs themselves weren't particularly good though. I just felt like they were random as hell. Not sure why they threw them in. It's kind of adding to my theory that they went all out with this one and tried appealing to that younger audience again with these random songs to sort of gain traction. You know how like songs from like Disney films often do, they get really popular and it helps promote the film. I feel like maybe that's what they were trying to do with these songs, but they weren't very good songs and they were definitely out of place. So yeah, the more I think about this film, the worse it gets, to be honest. Like, I don't think I'd ever want to watch this again. So that kind of makes me feel like I have to go with a lower score than I initially would have. While there were many, many entertaining moments, it certainly didn't entertain me the whole way through. If anything, it frustrated me at times with some of the routes it took with the story. I do think it really shows that there was a change in director this time around, though. I mean, the guy that made this also made an Alvin and the Chipmunks film. Sure, the guys that directed the first one were involved in the production for this one, but yeah, I think there's quite a visible change of pace for this film. So yeah, I think I'm gonna have to go 5 out of 10. Didn't really enjoy this. A lot of good moments, a lot of nice ideas thrown in, a pretty solid message by the end of the film, but yeah, just not really that great. Pretty poor sequel, not really sure if they're going to go for a third film, but I gotta say I don't think I want a third film, but we'll see. Maybe things will change, I don't know. So yeah, if you have seen this film, let me know your thoughts about it. If you think it was really good and you think I'm completely wrong with my 5 out of 10 score, that's fair enough. Let me know in the comments. Subscribe if you haven't already subscribed. Have a good day and goodbye.